This is the morning news analysis. It's the Thursday news analysis. I have a Ricola in my mouth. That's why it's moving weird. Um, Yesterday, David Lubofsky got a note that I am sure was, to say the least, cathartic for him. But I have to imagine it does nothing to assuage his feeling of injustice, because it does nothing to assuage my feeling of injustice. And Asher Dean Lubofsky, the boy at the center of this, who died when he was 5 years old on October 31, 2018, and I'll get back to that chronology, is not my son, it's his son. So I have to imagine the sense of outrage must have crept back as David Lubofsky read this letter from the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, signed by its chairman, Dr. Nate Berg. It's addressed to him. It's subject notice of resolution and disciplinary action, complaint number GBME-CO-20, that's the year 2020-005. This correspondence serves as formal notification that the Guam Board of Medical Examiners has concluded its investigation into the complaint filed against Dr. Dennis Sarmiento. Upon review of the evidence and documentation, the board has determined that there is a sufficient evidentiary and legal basis to warrant a finding that a violation of the Physicians Practice Act has occurred, pursuant to the authority vested in this body under Article 8-8.B of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners Administrative Rules and Regulations, adopted December 26, 2001. The board has implemented the following disciplinary actions. 1. Public letter of reprimand to be maintained within the practitioner's permanent licensing file. 2. Completion of a physician assessment program. And 3. Payment of investigative fees incurred by the board. Thank you for bringing this matter to the board's attention. Sincerely, Nathaniel Berg, MD, chair of the board. This represents the final leg of action that can conceivably be taken against the people who were involved in the care of Asher Dean Lubofsky between, I believe, the start date of the supposed care was either October 29 or October 30, 2018, to his death in the early morning of October 31, 2018. And this is a very sad story. And had it not been for the perseverance and the courage of David Lubofsky to share his grief over all of these years and turn that grief into a mission to change things in Guam so that these things don't happen to other fathers and mothers, so much would not have been done. I don't even know whether we would be at a resolution today by the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. This might be the first time in the last 6 years, 7 years, 8 years that the Guam Board of Medical Examiners has issued a finding adverse to a physician. Now the question is it enough? And in the context of our humanity, what's ever going to be enough when it comes to the compensation of a life lost, especially of a 5-year-old boy who died in the arms of his father? I want to take you back to what this story is all about. And it's a story that is close to my heart and very close to Candid's heart, because it was among the first investigative pieces that we ever did. And this was before we were ever a serious operation. But I mean, we've always been an operation that had some type of heart Some we had some type. We were always mission oriented, even before we became something more professional. And this was one of those first things. It was this look into the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act based on what happened to Asher Dean Lubofsky. So first, a long time ago, I think it was back in the 1980s, the Guam legislature, in order to attract more doctors to come to Guam, enacted the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act. It replaced some law. I cannot remember what it was. I remember I did a story about this, but I can't remember exactly the details. But this act, what it said was, in order for, if you are a survivor of medical malpractice, or if you are the loved one of someone who died because of medical malpractice, you can have some relief. You can basically sue for liability, but you got to go through an arbitration panel first. And since there's no arbitration panel in Guam, and it's the American arbitration something, you got to get those people to agree who are in the States. You got to fly them over. You got to pay for their expenses. You got to pay their fees. If you have a lawyer, you got to pay your lawyer's fees and all that. And the doctor would, of course, be responsible for paying his or her own lawyer's fees. But that's it. The only person on the hook for all those fees is the patient or the patient's survivors. And I don't know how this went unnoticed for so long. It really went generally unnoticed until the issue of Asher Dean Lubofsky's death came up. But even a federal court judge was like, hey, the only people who can afford, and only after you get, only after you either not satisfied with the arbitration panel ruling or whatever, can you take a matter to court. You cannot access the trial court. You cannot access the superior court or the district court or whatever until you go through this arbitration. And because of all the expenses that you have to pay, arbitration costs, at the time it was 5 figures, then it climbed to 6 figures. It's now 6 figures. You got to have 6 figures of cash in order to go through this arbitration process. And so even a federal court judge was like, hey, in order for you to access the courts, if you have a dispute regarding malpractice, is if you've got money. And that places a whole lot of people away from accessing the courts. Okay, so that's the law, right? I can't remember if there was it was one of these issues where I looked at Lillian Perez Posadas, longtime professional who had, served our public well. And I thought, wow, Lillian Perez Posadas, how could you have done that? How could you have done this? Right? And it was the CMS report, because CMS did a surprise inspection of GMH. And GMH did not publish this report, did not let the public know about this report. So we got a copy of the report, and the report's findings were significant. And the fact that there were so many adverse findings in this report, essentially, that Guam Memorial Hospital was so unfit as a facility where people should be receiving a standard of care, that a couple people had died. All these protocols were not being followed. And in the case of Asher Dean Lubofsky, a physician never came to see this boy the entire time that he was there. He was given Tylenol for children, I think it was. There were certain protocols that the hospital had that were just completely ignored by the nursing staff who were supposed to be attending to Asher Dean Lubofsky. And according to David Lubofsky, he several times called to the attention of the nursing staff, asked for the doctor, begged for the doctor, several times called certain issues to the attention of the nursing staff, like, why is my son wheezing? Why is there a crackling sound coming from my son while he's breathing? It's worse than the wheezing now. How come it looks like my son can't breathe? He's struggling to breathe. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Please get us emergency care. Please, please, please. Throughout the night, Asher Dean Lubofsky's condition worsened and worsened, and Guam Memorial Hospital ignored this little boy. He was 5 years old. And in the morning of October 31, he died in his father's arms. And so, of course, David Lubofsky was out for some justice, not just for his son, but to prevent another parent from being him. And he has carried this pain this entire time. And undeniable. And also, like, how could I ever understand that type of grief? I don't have any children, much less have lost a child. And so he set out on a collision course with the elite of this island. And even though all the odds were against this guy, he has managed to cause some change and to set this collision course, because the collision has happened. Reform is just a matter of time away. There are some doctors who are absolutely opposed to the reform of the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act, but I think they see the writing that's on the wall and how the public and even a federal court asking, how come we don't have access to the courts when something wrong happens to us in this case? Why are doctors the only protected class in this sense? And that's just on the medical malpractice side, right? There have been other avenues of relief, other ways of addressing this issue, not for the same purpose and not toward the same goals, but other ways of at least employing accountability. And those ways are built into the same system that has given us the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act, unfortunately. And this kind of goes to Samuel Kim's whole point about it doesn't work when the people doing the policing are the police themselves. The legislature, in its infinite wisdom, and I say that in infinite jest, has decided that the way professional bodies are going to be licensed or are going to be regulated is by placing those same professionals on the regulation boards. So on the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners, it's filled with nurses. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners, it's filled with doctors. I mean, there are some other people on it, but the majority are doctors, the majority are nurses. In the Guam Police Department, it's the Guam Police Department Internal Affairs Division. In the Guam Board of Allied Health, it's veterinarians and counselors or whatever, whoever all those allied health people are, right? And of course, and these professionals will say, oh, I can be completely objective. No, you can't. That's just not how it works, especially because we're such a small island and you guys do referrals and business with each other all the time. There ain't no way you can be 100% objective or even 50% objective. Come on. Let's not kid ourselves here. So had it not been for David Lubofsky making a big stink over the last several years, no, we would not have known, because the media just hasn't done its job, right? We would not have known that GBME has not found for the patient in the last several years. We would not have known that several complaints have been waiting for adjudication by the GBME. We would not have seen the public displays of arrogance by some of the members of this board and the board of nursing the board of nurse examiners. the sorts of things that they say about patients and the public and what it is that we are or are not entitled to know about these matters, we would not have known about the things that they wanted to keep secret about the people who they're licensing to come into Guam. Had it not been for David Lubofsky and his journey the past several years. But think about this. It was in 2018 that Asher Dean Lubofsky died. Some time ago, there was some type of settlement or something. The part of this that involves SDA clinic is not a public matter, but there was some type of resolution there. Complaints were brought to the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners for the nurses involved in Asher Dean Lubofsky's death. And there's an entire CMS report, an independent report by the federal government that talks about this. And a few days ago, according to a story in KUAM, the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners, they dismissed the cases. Nothing's going to happen to those nurses because according to the chairman of the board, Greg Woodard or something, or Woodward, they have endured enough. We've never even known their names. The public has never even known their names. Are they still GMH nurses? Do we have something to worry about? Now, according to the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners, there has not been an incident over the last 6 years. According to them, enough time has lapsed in order for the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners to be able to determine that this was a one-off. Imagine that a death of a 5-year-old boy is a one-off, right? And that enough time has lapsed for the board to be able to determine that it's not going to happen again because it hasn't happened in the last 8 years, 7 years, 8 years. The only reason enough time has lapsed is because the Guam Board of Nurse Examiners sat on this that long. There should have been a punishment long ago. And there needs to be some sort of an assurance to us as a community that this is not going to happen again because these nurses were sent to training, they were educated more, they were disciplined in this kind of way over at GMH. They are remorseful, they feel bad about the death of Asher Dean Lubofsky. We get none of that from this government. And we're just supposed to expect and accept that GMH is still okay. And then yesterday, we get news that there's a public letter of reprimand over the last doctor. There's another doctor too. I cannot remember the name. So there's 2 doctors who were involved or who were supposedly responsible in the care of Asher Dean Lubofsky over at GMH. This is the last one. And this is how it ends. It ends with a public letter of reprimand. It ends with this doctor paying investigative fees incurred by the board and a completion of a physician assessment program. The violation that they're talking about is a violation of the Physicians Practice Act. I don't know how I feel. I'm lying. I know how I feel. I feel like the Guam Board of Medical Examiners has really screwed us, the people. I feel like not only has it been long time for the Guam legislature to reform, not repeal, but reform the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act. Remember, it almost passed. Therese Terlahi's bill with number 112 in the 36th legislature almost passed, if not for the doctor lobby, who vociferously opposed any type of reform because they wanted the status quo. You even had a doctor who, thankfully, the legislature refused to allow her confirmation to the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, who went up against this reform effort and then within a few days cut off one of the senators who was receiving cancer treatment from her, Senator Hello Taidagui, who had spoken in favor of reforming that act, cut her off from treatment, from her services. So not only is it time for the legislature to reform this act, and to have the courage to do so. But it's also time for the legislature to reform how these professional bodies are regulated. Because it's not just that it's obvious, but the data shows that if you allow the police to police themselves, there will always be corruption. On the other side of the commercial break, we'll get to Mary Torres, congressional candidate. She is calling out Congressman Jim Moylan and asking what the heck is he doing, because 7,000 people in just May 29, May 30, May 31, in just 4 days are going to lose their SNAP benefits. Stick with us. We'll talk about that on the other side of this commercial break.